The final tumbler turned. Behind the wall, the unmistakable sound of a reel-to-reel cassette player starting. "I told you!" Montague half screamed. "I tried to warn you of the horrors that await behind these walls!" PseudoPod, episode 686, January 24th, 2020. That still feels weird to say. The Phantom Rider by Otis Adelbert Klein. Hi everyone, welcome to PseudoPod, the weekly horror podcast. This story originally appeared in Weird Tales in November of 1924, and I, the owner and John Alistair Stewart of a name which has a certain heft to it, bow down to Otis Adelbert Klein, because game recognises game. Otis was an assistant editor at Weird Tales from its inception. He contributed numerous stories to the magazine and edited a single issue, that would be the May to July 1924, in which appeared the infamous story The Loved Dead, which we ran last week. In the mid-1930s, Klein largely abandoned writing to concentrate on his career as an agent, most notably for fellow Weird Tales author Robert E. Howard, who has appeared here at Escape Artists several times in the past. Klein is best known for an apocryphal literary feud with fellow author Edgar Rice Burroughs, in which he supposedly raised the latter's ire by producing close imitations of Burroughs' Martian novels, though set on Venus. Burroughs, the story goes, then retaliated by writing his own Venus novels, whereupon Klein responded with an even more direct intrusion on Burroughs' territory by boldly setting two novels on Mars. This, gentle listeners, is the literary equivalent of waving your hand in front of your opponent's face and yelling, "Still not touching, still not touching." Klein's jungle adventure stories, reminiscent of Burroughs' Tarzan tales, have also been cited as evidence of the conflict. While the two authors did write the works in question, the theory that they did so as part of a feud is, well, the evidence is slim. The feud theory was originally set forth in a fan press article in 1936, The Klein-Burroughs War by Donald A. Wollheim. In 1963, it was given wider circulation by Sam Moskowitz in his book Explorers of the Infinite. Richard A. Lupoff debunked the case in 1965 in his book Edgar Rice Burroughs' Master of Adventure. Among the evidence cited by Lupoff discounting the feud, no comment from either writer acknowledging the feud is documented, and family members of the two have no recollection of ever hearing them mention it. There's a joke here about LiveJournal, I'm sure, but you're all adults, I trust you to pick it up. Your reader for this story is Sean Sorrentino, and so, Sean, who lives in the Raleigh, North Carolina area with his wife and his dogs, and the magnificently named Otis Adelbert Klein, have a story for you. And we promise you, it's true.
The Phantom Rider by Otis Adelbert Klein, narrated by Sean D. Sorrentino. Big Bill Hawkins laid the trap with admirable precision. Every little detail had been worked out with the utmost nicety. The carefree manner of his partner, Seth Ormsby, indicated that he suspected nothing, though he did seem somewhat puzzled by Big Bill's unwanted loquacity and unprecedented joviality. He had shown a strange lack of enthusiasm when, after a summer of unrequited toil, the prospectors had stumbled on a vein that had promised to make them both independently wealthy. During the days spent in preliminary work, with a view to replenishing their depleted larder, he had been unusually taciturn, even sullen at times. As they rode abreast along the trail, followed by the two pack mules, the foremost of which bore in its saddlebags enough gold dust to purchase the entire general store at Red Dog, Big Bill outdid himself in his efforts to be agreeable. At the same time, he was thinking, planning. Big Bill, a dyed-in-the-wool prospector, had first met Ormsby in the Deerfoot Saloon at Red Dog. He had lived up most of his savings and needed a grubstake. Ormsby, a wandering cowpuncher out of a job, had the necessary money. Under the mellowing influence of liquor, they had struck up a partnership. The country which they were wandering was an open book to Hawkins, and Ormsby, the newcomer, always relied on his burly partner when a choice of directions was to be made. It was Hawkins who, in this instance, had suggested that they take a new trail to Red Dog, where papers were to be filed and supplies purchased. Big Bill felt that he had ample reason to hate Ormsby. For 19 years he had been prospecting in this region, sometimes with a partner, but more often alone. He had managed to find enough pay dirt to keep body and soul together, and had made occasional moderate strikes rich enough to support him in idleness for several months at a time. The thing that stuck in his craw was the fact that when this big strike came, the strike for which he had been hoping, toiling, and struggling for 19 years, he must share it with this greenhorn, this newcomer who couldn't tell quartz from shale. He had gambled the best years of his life for this stake, and felt that fortune had cold-decked him when she'd finally dealt him one royal flush and Ormsby the other. It meant that they must either split the pot or leave it up for a showdown, and Big Bill had resolved on a showdown dealt from his own stacked deck. "Seems like we're going sorta out of the way to get to Red Dog," remarked Ormsby, when they suddenly turned at the fork in the trail. "Not so much," replied Big Bill with studied indifference. "They's a water hole down this way, and the animals ain't going to be none the worse off for wetting their whistles. We got to think of them as well as ourselves. It's a long, hot ride, and the trail is bone dry." "Right you are, Bill. I plumb forgot about the poor brutes. A man'll do that sometimes when he got a full canteen himself." "You're a hell of a cow-puncher," roared Hawkins. "I don't never forget 'em. They can't run without water, no more'n an automobile can run without gasoline." "It's this big strike of ourn that's got me kind of loco," replied Ormsby. "I don't know whether I'm horseback or riding an aeroplane half the time." Big Bill did not reply. His eyes were on the trail ahead. The time for action was almost at hand. The sharp curve, now only 50 feet away, was the appointed place. Nearer and nearer they drew to that curve. Big Bill's gaze did not falter. True, the hands that held the reins trembled slightly, but there was nothing in his expression that might serve to betray his purpose. He was wearing his poker face. The time for the showdown had arrived. He reined back slightly, drew his keen hunting knife, and stealthily severed the lead ropes. With a vicious kick, he suddenly drove his spur into the left flank of his unsuspecting steed. As the horse reared, he pulled on the right rein, jerking his animal against Ormsby's mount. The ledge was a narrow one, and the drop only a matter of a few feet. Horse and rider lurched, slipped, and fell into something that received them with a dull splash. A moment later, man and beast were struggling desperately in a yielding, slimy mess that threatened to engulf them in a few seconds. Big Bill's horse galloped swiftly up the trail for more than 100 yards. By sawing the bit, he brought the animal to a prancing walk, then to a dead stop. He turned and rode leisurely back. The frightened squeals of the mired horse all but drowned the man's cries for help. "My God, Bill, it's quicksand!" shouted Ormsby. Hawkins dismounted leisurely and walked to the brink. Taking a plug of tobacco from his pocket, he bit off a hunk, chewed for a moment, then spat into the bubbling, slimy mess beneath him. "Damned if it ain't," he said. "Hang on for a minute. I'll throw you a rope." With steady deliberation, he turned and gave his attention to the coiled lariat that dangled from his saddle. He seemed to be having trouble with the knots. "Hurry, Bill, for God's sake!" cried Ormsby. "It's up to my waist already." Big Bill continued to pull at the tangled lariat. Somehow, with each pull, the knot grew tighter. At length he turned. Ormsby had succeeded in loosing his own rope and was trying to throw it to him. The slimy ooze was up to his armpits. Of his horse, nothing could be seen but the foam-flecked nostrils. These disappeared as he cast the rope. It fell at the feet of Hawkins. "Grab hold of the rope, Bill. I think I can crawl out on it." Big Bill stooped slowly and picked up the slime-smeared rope. Then, with a vicious laugh that was almost a snarl, he hurled it into the face of his victim. The deadly quagmire had reached Ormsby's chin. A look of blank surprise came to his face. It was followed by one of hatred and revulsion as the sinister purpose of his partner was revealed to him. He tilted his head backward for one last sobbing inhalation. "You dirty coyote!" he gasped. "You murdering yellow dog! I'll get you for this if I have to break out of hell to do it! Ow!" His speech was cut short by the mounting quicksand. A slimy hand waved for a moment above the surface, clutching claw-like at the empty air. Then it, too, disappeared. Big Bill surveyed the bubble-strewn surface of the quagmire, apparently unmoved. The only remaining trace of his revolting crime was Ormsby's half-submerged Stetson, which had fallen a few feet from where the owner went down. He sank it from sight with a carefully aimed rock fragment. Then he turned his attention to the waiting animals. The two pack mules watched him unconcernedly, their long ears drooping limply, as he picked up the end of the lead ropes and knotted them together. He vaulted into the saddle and rode to the waterhole only a few rods distant. When the beasts had drunk their fill, he set out with all haste for Red Dog. The blood-red sun was poised just above the western horizon when Big Bill rode into the village. After seeing that his animals were properly bedded and fed, he removed the heavy sacks of dust from his saddlebags and hied to Bonell's general store. "Hello, Bill," greeted Dave Bonell, peering over his silver-rimmed spectacles as the burly prospector strode through the door. "Where's your partner?" Big Bill laughed a bit nervously. "Skipped out a couple of weeks ago for parts unknown," he replied. "Took most of the grub with him, too, the damn skunk. But the joke's on him. Day after he left, I struck pay dirt and staked out a nice little claim for myself. I want you to weigh in this dust for me and fix up my papers." The ancient counter trembled with the impact of the two heavy bags which he suddenly placed before the astonished shopkeeper. Dave Bonell weighed the gold dust with wide-eyed wonder. "You sure hit pay dirt this time, didn't you, Bill?" he remarked. "Want any cash on this or just a receipt?" "Give me about 100 cash and a receipt for the balance," replied the prospector. "I'll allow to ride over and file this claim in the morning. Think you can fix my papers up this evening so I can get an early start tomorrow?" "Have 'em ready for you by the time you get through with your supper," said Bonell. Aside from being a storekeeper, he was a notary public and a justice of the peace. Bill ambled over to the Deerfoot Saloon for a couple of shots of whiskey as an appetizer. Then he went to the adjoining cafe where he tucked a huge beefsteak, a half a dozen eggs, French fried potatoes, coffee, and a piece of pie under his belt. After lighting a long black cigar, he returned to the store. Bonell had the papers ready for his signature. He removed his hat, raised his right hand in solemn oath, and affixed his name. "Well, so long, Dave," he muttered when Bonell handed in the documents. "See you tomorrow afternoon." "You'll be wanting some grubbing things, I suppose?" "Yeah, plenty of things. So long." "So long, Bill." Late the following afternoon, Big Bill rode back from the county seat, the sole owner of the richest claim that had been filed in that office for many years. He had often wondered how it would feel to be wealthy. Time and again he had planned the things he would do should he ever strike it rich. Now that the big moment had arrived, however, his thoughts were chaos. For one thing, he had promised himself plenty of wine, women, and song. As Red Dog afforded only the first mentioned article, and it would be necessary for him to inhabit that village for some time to come, he decided that the time for indulgence was at hand. Accordingly, he drew up before the Deerfoot Saloon, carelessly tossed his reins over a hitching post, and strode through the door, oozing affluence. The wine was, of course, only figurative. Big Bill looked on wine as a woman's drink. He liked his liquor, and he liked it straight. He swaggered up to the bar and planked a $20 bill on the counter before the astonished eyes of Joe McGinnis, the porcine bartender. "What do you got that's good and strong, Joel?" he asked. "Well, we have some Old Crow, some Archivite that'll proof about 120, and some 3-star Hennessy, and give me 3-star, and see what the rest of the boys will have." The motley crew of cowpunchers, prospectors, sheep herders, card sharps, and others of doubtful occupations and no occupations at all voiced their various wants in no uncertain terms. When they were served, they drained their glasses, chorusing, "It's looking at you," "Here's how," and "Happy days." Convivial companionship was not lacking after that, especially since Big Bill, in view of his recent prosperity, insisted on buying a lion's share of the refreshments. By 10:30, however, the crowd began to thin out. Many of the roisterers lurched out to their waiting steeds, some singly, others in small groups. A few who would imbibe too freely lay with heads resting on tables or lolled back in their chairs, oblivious to the drunken songs and ribald jests that went up from those who were able to hold their moorings before the bar. Big Bill tossed his last $20 note under the nose of the barkeeper. "Give us another drink, Joe," he said gravely. "What the hell are you standing there like a damn dumb Isaac for? Jeremy? Shit jam bum Isaac? What you are, too." "You had enough, Bill," said Joe. "Here, put your money in your pocket and go on to bed." "Had enough, did I?" Big Bill glanced hostilely at the bartender. "Yeesh, I know when I've had enough. Give me drink." "You'll get no more drink tonight. Not here, anyway." "Say, who the hell you think you're talking to? Do I get a drink or don't I?" Big Bill was getting ugly. His hand stole towards the .45 that hung at his hip. The revelers on either side of him stepped back in alarm. "You heard what I said. Take your money and get out." The .45 roared, and broken glasses tinkled in a shower behind the bar. It roared again, and a hole appeared in the mirror, surrounded by spoke-like cracks that radiated in all directions. The sheriff, who had been enjoying a sociable game of draw poker in the back room, poked his head and gun from between the double doors at one and the same time. "What the hell's going on here?" he roared. Big Bill had a wholesome fear of the law. The sight of the gun and star almost sobered him. Panic-stricken, he dropped his .45, rushed out through the door, and flung himself upon his horse. The sheriff ran after him, but was stayed by Joe Vienza. "Let him go, Jack," he said. "He's nobody hurt, and we can make him pay for the glasses and mirror tomorrow. He's rich enough to buy this whole town now." Big Bill, galloping hastily along the village street, felt sure that he was being pursued. He spurred his horse until the blood spurted from its gashed sides and tried to think. What was it he had done? For the life of him, he could not remember. Everything was hazy up to the time the sheriff had appeared. Suddenly his hand touched the empty holster. He had used his gun. Perhaps he had killed a man. Killed a man! The thought persisted. Yes, he had killed a man only the day before, and that man had sworn. What was it he had sworn? The exact words of dying Ormsby came back to him with amazing vividness. "I'll get you for this if I have to break out of hell to do it." Could a man break out of hell, or wherever his spirit might chance to go? Could the dead return to wreak vengeance on those who had wronged them? He wondered, then urged his horse forward with renewed frenzy as the sharp clatter of hoofbeats sounded close behind him. It seemed, however, that with the first staccato click of those pursuing hoofs, the horse needed no urging. The frightened beast leaped forward with his ears laid back and nostrils distended as if running for his very life. But despite the speed he was making, the increasing distinctness of the sounds behind him told Big Bill that his pursuer was gaining on him, gaining with amazing rapidity. He expected to hear a command to halt or feel a bullet between his shoulder blades at any moment. He feared to go on, feared to stop, even feared to turn and look at his pursuer. The suspense was nerve-wracking. Well, it would soon be a matter of his life or that of the sheriff. Undoubtedly he had shot a man, and if taken for it, he would swing. His .45 was gone, but he still had his Derringer. With an oath, he snatched it from his pocket and swung in the saddle. His pursuer was less than 50 feet behind him, and Big Bill seldom missed at 50 feet. He raised the tiny weapon and fired. Then, seeing that the bullet had not taken effect, he cursed and fired again. His pursuer came on, sitting bolt upright in the saddle, apparently unmoved. There was something strange about the appearance of the oncoming man and beast, something terrifying and appalling. He had not noticed it first, but the realization suddenly burned itself into his consciousness. The horse was strangely familiar, and the man, only one man had ever worn his Stetson creased thus, and at that particular jaunty angle, and that man was dead, murdered. Again the words of the slain Ormsby had come back to him. "I'll get you for this if I have to break out of hell to do it." He strained his eyes in an attempt to pierce the semi-darkness. Suddenly the moon peered from behind a rapidly moving cloud, and he knew. The Derringer dropped from his nerveless fingers. A queer choking feeling paralyzed his throat. He passed his hand before his eyes and looked again. The vision persisted. Nearer and nearer came that silent, relentless pursuer. With a shudder of horror, Big Bill saw that he or it was uncoiling a lariat. The loop widened, whirled about that ghostly head, and shot through the air. Big Bill ducked, then uttered a shriek of mortal terror that ended in a gurgling, agonized wail as the rope settled and tightened about his throat. For a moment he felt himself dangling in empty air. Then all went black. Early the following morning, 2 cowpunchers from the Bar L Ranch rode into Red Dog. One carried an extra saddle and bridle, the other the rapidly stiffening body of Big Bill Hawkins. They were quickly surrounded by a crowd of curious onlookers, foremost among whom was the sheriff. "Where'd you find him? What happened?" asked the sheriff, as 2 men assisted in lowering the corpse to the ground. The cowboy whose horse had borne the body dismounted. "The hangest queerest thing I ever seen," he said. "We found Big Bill and his horse lying at the bottom of a ravine. Bill was dead, and the horse had broken both forelegs, so we shot him. But what killed Bill? As near as I can make out, he was roped and strangled. There's a rope burn around his neck, and he don't seem to have no broken bones or other injuries." "Who follered Big Bill out of Red Dog last night?" demanded the sheriff, facing the crowd. "No one follered him," volunteered a prospector. "I seen him come out and ride away alone." "Whoever got him," continued the cowboy, "must have left in an airship." "An airship? What do you mean?" "Well, me and my partner went up to the top of the ravine to try to find out what happened. We saw the tracks of Bill's horse where he'd come running up and plunged over the edge. Beside them was the trail of another horse that ended in a 4-track sliding square like your bronc makes when you rope a steer." "And where did they go from there?" "That's just the point. We hunted high and low and circled the place for 100 yards in every direction. There wasn't a single track of horse or man leading away from the place where Bill Hawkins died."
First of all, I doubt I will hear a more glorious and chewy set of syllables than unwanted loquacity this week. That's just granola in syllabic terms, isn't it? I love it. What I love about this story, though, is the way it combines the blank page of the Western myth with the point at which the firelight dims. Of course, the West wasn't uncharted territory, but for men like this, that lie suited them to the ground, was an excuse, was armor. The idea of making your own destiny was enthralling. The fact you were remaking it on someone else's land, quite possibly soaked in their blood, inconvenient. For them, for a while. But it's the way the inherent fear that lies in that, no, there was nothing here before us belief, ties into the concept of something just outside what we know that really works. It's that moment that haunts me. We've talked about it numerous times before. The lobstrosity in the mist, emerging from the mist, unaware and uncaring of what it brushes up against and destroys. The supernatural meets the cruel, and what happens in the middle is both terrifying and enticingly close to that true American myth. The superhero origin story. Just a few decades early. Simple, effective, pulpy, and smart. Right on for justice, sir. Right on. We rely on you to pay our authors and cover our server costs, and, well, I gotta be honest with you, everything else. We do this through one of 2 ways. We collect money through PayPal, which you can do by clicking on PseudoPod.org and clicking on Feed the Pod. You can subscribe for as little as $5 a month, and at that point, you get access to all kinds of lovely extra audio stuff. Or you can go to Patreon.com and subscribe for as little as $5 a month. On Patreon, we are so close, I think it's like $40 to our new funding goal. This is complicated. I'll try for the Cliff Notes version. The SFWA raised the qualifying pro rate last year, and we matched it. Our donations did not match the extra outlay that caused, so that has become our first funding target. Or the first half of it. The second half of it is paying our associate editors, and we are maybe $40 off being able to do that, thanks to the determination of our staff and you, our listeners. So, if you can donate, please do, like I say, either pseudopod.org, click on Feed the Pod, PayPal, or Patreon will be a massive, massive help. And if you can't donate, then maybe link to a story, or talk about it, or leave a review, do something to help raise our profile a little bit, because believe me, we need that too. And thank you all. We will return next week with The Yellow Cat by Michael Joseph. Then, as now, we will be a production of Escape Artists Incorporated and released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. And we leave you with this quote from the magnificent Hell on Wheels. Blood will be spilled, lives will be lost, fortunes will be made, men will be ruined. We'll see you next week, folks. Until then, have fun.
It's a PseudoPod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.